Good afternoon, everyone. I am Montgomery County Council President Gabriel Burnos, and we are here as our Health and Human Services Committee. Just a quick announcement that our colleague and friend Councilmember Rice will not be able to join us this afternoon, but we are joined for the first item we will be discussing today with our other colleague and friend, Councilmember Navarro. And this is to discuss a special appropriation to the county government's FY23 operating budget, Department of Health and Human Services, in the amount of $1,593,442 for newcomer enhancements and assistance. I want to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Department of Health and Human Services, and in particular Sonia Mora, who has been working in partnership and coordination with a number of key organizations to help make sure that Montgomery County continues its long-standing legacy of being a welcoming community to all of our residents, especially those in crisis and in need. It speaks to not just the morals of us as a community, but frankly of us as a country. And I'm proud of the work that has been accomplished as we have tackled an issue that has become politicized in a way that is frankly dangerous, and one that has, I know, been at times overwhelming. I also want to acknowledge the many nonprofit organizations who, when they learned about these buses that were coming from Texas and now from other parts of the country as well, immediately went into action and began a partnership and alliance that bears worth repeating is a model for the entire country, and one that we are proud to be supporting. And that's what we are here today, is to discuss this appropriation. I will now yield to Councilmember Navarro if she'd like to make some opening comments. And I'll just say this, I've only got a couple more opportunities, but I'm going to use them, is just acknowledging and thanking her for her longstanding partnership and leadership in this and so many other spaces in our community. It's one of the many long-lasting legacies that she will leave behind. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and you also have a long-standing legacy in this space. I think that this is one of those areas where our motto, Montgomery County values its diversity and it's our strength, and that we live our values out loud. For me, this is one of those topics ever since I joined the county council, and quite frankly, even when I was on the Board of Education, working with former council members to provide what is really just. I mean, we at the local level are now responsible for comprehensive immigration reform. We advocate for it quite a bit, but we are the ones who are left with the actual response every single time there is an influx. And I think it just builds on the tradition, quite frankly, generally, of what this country has done. And I know for me personally, when I joined the county council as an immigrant myself, having come to the United States under very different circumstances, under very privileged circumstances, understood immediately that we have a responsibility to do whatever we can to provide support, because it's about human rights and it's about really, again, living our values out loud. And so there's been a long history with previous administrations in strengthening these programs. I have worked with my colleagues to stand up and strengthen a lot of different infrastructure and programs, and here we are again. As it is reflected in the packet, there is something that's kind of new, and quite frankly, for me personally, it touches me in ways that I never expected, which is the fact that, of course, there has been a historic migration out of Venezuela. About 7 million people have left Venezuela because of the situation in the country. The United States has recognized this and has offered and actually granted temporary protective status to Venezuelans who were here in the United States already, but also the ability for folks to apply for refugee status and to be able to apply for asylum. And so, because this is a historic migration of extraordinary proportion, sooner or later we knew that people were going to come to the United States as well, and they have. The only other issue with that is that it's also become a political football. And so we have all seen the news where two particular governors, Governor of Florida DeSantis and Abbott in Texas, have literally just shipped people all over the country, including our own region. And of course, folks have also ended up here in Montgomery County, and I will echo Council President's comments that our nonprofit organizations, the administration has really stepped up to provide that kind of support, because this was unprecedented. We were not prepared. So having said that, I want to thank County Executive for sending over the special appropriation request. The request does identify some organizations who have been doing a lot of work on the ground and need some capacity, but I have also made a request that we add funding that can be flexible and can be used as grants for those organizations who are not part of the original special appropriation but have been out there from the very beginning. And these are smaller organizations. Some of them are they're actual Venezuelan American organizations that have what I call cultural proficiency, in the sense that they understand the very unique circumstances of this community, and they just need a little bit of money to continue to do and address this issue. So that is something that I have discussed, of course, with Sonia, with Ms. Tritt-Vance, Sonia Mora, with Ms. Tritt-Vance, and also I had an opportunity to talk to the executive about it, and I think this would go a long way in really, in my opinion, completing the ecosystem to provide the support. We also have a lot of religious institutions that have stepped up in informal and formal ways, and they may also need to access a little bit of funding to carry them through. So the idea would be for this to be grant funds, and Mr. Rafael Murphy has also indicated that they can put together a process to provide that support. So I'm here to humbly request from my committee members to please support that additional request of $200,000 for it to be grant funds that can then be accessed by the smaller organizations that are already on the ground doing the work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. We've been joined by Ms. Tritt-Vance, and I know you've been doing a lot of heavy lifting in this space as well, Ms. Tritt-Vance, and I really want to thank you publicly for all of that hard work. It is making a difference, and it is so important, especially now. So, and I will absolutely support the additional funding request to add on to this great work, in part because many of these organizations, again, stepped up without any resources at all. And frankly, Montgomery County was a leader in the region for a lot of different reasons. And so I think it does make sense for us to be able to continue and collaborate, and I appreciate the executive branch's acknowledgement and support for that, and these new and emerging organizations who are doing some really terrific work in this space when, again, we hadn't gotten a lot of regional support. So I think this is really good. Last thing I'll mention before turning it over to the central staff is that I know that the Biden administration has been following closely what we have been doing here in Montgomery County, and I know I can speak in the first person about how they have uplifted these efforts nationally. So the reach goes beyond just the direct services that we are providing here. This is a model that is going to be replicated, not hopefully, but will be, in other communities across the country. And that, again, speaks to our values as a country. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Clemens Johnson and Ms. McGuire to set this up, and then I'll turn it over, of course, to Ms. Tritt-Vance to add anything, and Ms. Mora as well, that they'd like to add. But turn it over to you.
Thank you, Council President Albornoz. So as you mentioned, we are discussing the special appropriation for $1,593,442,000 for the Newcomers Program. The intent of this funding is to support case management, crisis stabilization services for the refugee children, emergency services, and food distribution, and a host of other needs that are identified within the packet. As we know, since 2014, there has been an unprecedented increase in the number of unaccompanied minors coming to Montgomery County. And between 2014 and 2022, Montgomery County has been the 11th county in the nation to receive, ranking 11, I'll say, to receive unaccompanied minors and individuals that are being shifted here to help join with their families here. In the past few years, we have usually gotten an overall update on the Newcomers Project around this time, usually mid-year. Due to the special appropriation and our timing that we have today, we won't have a general update, but we will hear from DHHS and the executives on the current status of the program, the need for the additional funds, and the need for the additional funds. As Councilmember Navarro detailed, there was a proposal submitted for an additional $200,000 that will support a competitive grant process to support service delivery. So this will take the appropriation amount to $1,793,442,000. We do have Raphael Murphy here from the Grants Office to discuss any questions about what that competitive grant process will look like and any specifics that maybe needed to be added to the resolution if this vote is finalized. The suggestion of council staff is that there be a robust update in the spring as things have been changing, especially with the influx of the migrants sent from the Texas and Arizona border and how that is going. So I will give it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clemens Johnson. So just before turning it over to the HHS team, just some logistics. We have a hard stop today, 2:30. Have a lot to get through. So we will have a more robust presentation in the spring and give our incoming colleagues the opportunity to hear in the first person the great work that is being done and give them an opportunity to ask questions formally from the dais. So with that in mind, if you'd like to share anything at a high level that you think the committee should hear before voting on this appropriation of 1.7 and change, please let us know.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I am so grateful on behalf of the administration for the support that you have always lended to the migrant community and in particular to the newcomers. It's been a real ordeal, I think, for the families that have been arriving since quite a while, but frankly, the ones that have been recently coming because they have not had families that have been waiting for them here. So it's been really difficult to serve these families. I think we have done an awesome job, particularly HHS. Dira here her and her team have done an amazing work, and as you did, we want to thank also the community-based organizations that have been working to support the work. From the executive side, we have been working also at a regional level to try to get other jurisdictions to respond to the crisis. We did step up very early, as you know, and by the first week in June, we had our respite center that is being administered by SAMU. So we gave a right of entry to this organization, international organization, and they have been doing an amazing job. And I mean, maybe Dira, you can share a little bit more about how they connect to the newcomers program here. But it's been very difficult without the collaboration of other jurisdictions to really do the work as we want. However, thank you, Council President Albornoz and other council members that have been working with COG, and our administration has been trying to reach to other jurisdictions. We are currently in conversations with Prince George's County to see if we can open another respite center. We are working in conjunction with DC, sharing our model and seeing what we can do to enhance the work. And so we have no idea what is going to happen in the future regarding the buses and how many will be coming. But we want to be ready as well. The other part is that as we enter into a new administration at the state level, we want to start working with the state, the new governor, and others to be able to see how we can perhaps look at policy issues as well as maybe even identifying some resources at that level. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm so glad to be here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, and thank you for having me, Dira Tridvance. For the record, I'm still learning housekeeping for these meetings and these sessions. So for the sake of time, I'll be very quick. We're in the process of generating and completing our year one report, which will be inclusive of a very thorough update of what the unaccompanied minors model initially looked like and how we've pivoted, and we'll go into more detail in terms of how we've navigated some of these these very difficult waters. But the one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't say is I truly just wanted to thank the county executive, and I really wanted to thank the council for truly centering equity in this discussion. In order to do that, it means going against the grain. It means looking at things from a perspective that on the surface look inequitable, but when you dig a little bit deeper, we end up finding it. And I just want to thank you for that flexibility, for allowing us in our posts to be able to imagine, to be able to tell the truth of what equity looks like in a situation like this, even when it isn't a popular opinion or a popular posture. So I just really wanted to thank you for that flexibility and for allowing us to be the unaccompanied. The Bienvenidos model started off with unaccompanied minors, and we were in the process of trying to open it up because the stories, the trajectories of the newcomer and the migrant populations are not just one size fits all. And we really wanted to be able to serve everybody, but our package and our menu of services didn't allow us to do that. And the Texas and Arizona situation kind of put a little bit of a fire, and it allowed us to kind of experiment with what this system could possibly look like. And I just wanted to thank you all for that opportunity, for allowing us to be able to reimagine what this looks like in order for it to be equitable to meet the unique needs of this population. So with that, I'll just stop there.
Thank you. That was well said. Council Vice President Glass has a question, and then I'd actually like to invite Rafael to the dais really quick, just to have a quick 30,000-foot question for him. Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the work that you and Councilmember Navarro have been doing on this, along with the executive branch as well. This is not only an all hands on deck here in the county, but it has been a regional conversation that has taken place, and notably we've been seeing kind of the calls for assistance, notably in the District of Columbia, and clearly recognizing that there are no borders. We've been doing what we can here in Montgomery County, and so I appreciate everybody's efforts. With the report you said that's coming, that's being worked on, I just have a question that might be leading towards that report, but as we talk about this funding, can you briefly share with us the coordination and potentially any whether there are some struggles with regard to community organizations, faith-based groups, or even within the county government itself to try and do right by all of these residents and provide them with all the assistance? I mean, this is tough work. And so I'm just curious to hear from your perspective how all of these different moving parts are working, or need to be done better, quite frankly.
Well, we got a long way to go. We're never going to be perfect at this. We're always going to be stepping on each other's toes, especially when it's moments of crises and everybody wants to do right. So we would most definitely not be here and have seen the success that we've had if it wasn't for our community-based organizations and our providers truly stepping up for this call. And that's the biggest investment that I think we should be making. How could we resource them a little bit better? The limitations that we had was because we pivoted to take on some of those responsibilities, like trying to find hotel accommodations for the folks coming in from Texas and Arizona, and a few other pieces that are now part of this new menu of services that we weren't equipped to offer before. And there were a lot of organizations that were sort of missing and absent from this special appropriation because the lens that we sort of utilized to put this forward was to see how could we beef up and work with our network. However, our strategy to alleviate the providers from this pressure looked a little bit different and not necessarily from a fiscal perspective. And that manifested itself from the partnership with SAMU. We knew that our providers could not take on the load of meeting everybody at the buses, every single individual. It's a huge load and a burden to carry on their own. So this partnership with SAMU really allowed us to be able to sort of offload some of that from the providers so that they could help and assist in different ways that were a little bit more manageable. So that really truly saved us. That was the strategy that we implemented to be able to offload some of the needs from our providers, but we haven't gotten it perfect. And we most definitely, I think what we are missing is trying to figure out a cohesive, coordinated system within the newcomers of the Bienvenidos initiative with SAMU, with other jurisdictions, and most importantly with the other community-based organizations doing this work that fall and exist outside of the Bienvenidos initiative within Montgomery County. And I don't know if Sonia, you had anything you wanted to offer.
Well, coordination is so important. And it was a little bit difficult at the beginning with some of the faith-based organizations because they were really trying, and volunteer organizations, they were trying to do their best, but they didn't know where to go. So luckily we have our faith-based initiative in the Office of Community Partnerships. They meet once a month, and HHS and also SAMU are now attending those meetings. So that particularly with the people coming in the buses, a lot of people wanted to go in and just help. But having SAMU at the meetings is important because all the agencies are saying, how can we help? So someone can say we need food or we need clothing or whatever. So that has alleviated the load, I think. And I think the agencies feel like they're more engaged in the process because before they were trying to do things on their own. We were trying to work with our community-based agencies as well. So, but we continue to enhance that. We have a weekly meeting also. It's a partnership meeting where SAMU, United Way, that's the fiscal agent for SAMU, sometimes FEMA attends, Washington, D.C. sends individuals as well. So we try to also do some coordination at the regional level. So as much as we can, we're trying to do that. I think the challenge is going to be, as Ms. Chadwins was saying, is ensuring that the original model of newcomers is going to be modified also so that we can serve this other population in the appropriate way, in the coordinated fashion.
Right. I appreciate that, and where there's a will, there's a way, and we clearly want to help, and we are, and the dedicated resources, the nonprofit providers and partners that are already willing and able, that might just need a little coordination, a little hand-holding, and the fact that we're trying, and we're refining, and we're learning, and we're doing is just what we need. So thank you for those efforts.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much. And also, I forgot to thank everyone who joined the October 24th meeting that my office put together. And I appreciated especially the representatives from Council President Albornoz's office and Council Vice President's office. Also, we had representatives from Councilmember Jawanda's office and a host of community members as well. And so just a couple of really quick questions. In terms of the 1.5, one of the feedback that we got was this issue of the hotline not being available during the weekend. So I'm hoping that, with that funding, that can be expanded. I think that would fall under maybe, I don't know, communications or something like that. But I think being able to at least have somebody, on call or something to that effect would be really important, especially in those moments of crises. Mr. Oscar Alvarenga also mentioned some issues with furniture distribution and things like that. And I'm sure that perhaps we can partner with some folks to figure out how that can be done. And I was glad that he was there. There's that liaison with the school system that is so important. And then finally, just the list of resources that I think we also mentioned during that meeting. So the council member offices, especially the ones coming in, might have handy a list of resources in case they are contacted and they don't know where to turn. So I think I just wanted to elevate that again as something that came up as its feedback. And then with Mr. Murphy, I just very quickly. So if the committee decides to support the additional $200,000 that will be turned into a grants program for those organizations not included in the larger pot. How and if the council, of course, I'm hoping will then support it. What would be the process for organizations to then access that money? Would it be like some announcement? Would it be like somebody who's going to be the contact person? Because of course these are not organizations that are traditionally been involved in a lot of things here in the county, but are the ones providing that support already. So just if you could just share very quickly, how would that work?
Thank you. Raphael Murphy, Office of Grants Management Director. It would work very similar to the way the FY23 abortion access program worked, and so how we ran that in terms of the overall process, how it was structured on our website, this application platform that we've set up, how we marketed it, having information sessions, that folks can come in, participate in, or having them recorded. So if they missed the actual event, they can come in and see what was presented. Office of Grants Management, per the legislation, is the point of contact for grants programs. So they'd reach out to me for questions, and if I can't answer them, I would work with my colleagues here for however the program is designed to get them answers to their questions. With abortion access, we had some legal questions that came up, worked with OCA to find answers for the people asking them whether a certain activity would be eligible or not. So there's a great deal of customer support and service that goes into that process. So if they're new to the county's application system, they're new to the county's processes and all that, or timelines, or understanding with the text, what's eligible, what's not, we provide that support, get them the answers, and then even if it's as simple as helping them upload stuff onto the application, we're happy to support that. The way that the Abortion Access Program worked was policy leadership rested with HHS and Commission for Women, to help structure the program, making sure it's fitting council's intent. There's a lot of detailed nuances that go into that. So they would help me put together the framework for the program. I put it on our application portal. We launch it, and again, have this about a month-long period for applications and providing customer support during that time. After the application portal closes, I'd rely on the subject matter experts in departments to identify a review panel. I would shepherd them through the review process, make award recommendation decisions, and immediately after that, once awards have been made, my office again would step up and develop the grant agreements that would again get shepherded through and start getting the money out the door. So this would not go through procurement. This would be probably just a grant agreement.
I appreciate that. The only thing I would, ask and request, of course, is that this be done as expeditiously as possible, because these organizations, again, have been operating pretty much on their own, and they need to access these resources like yesterday in order for them to continue to provide that support, which has made our overall response, I think, a lot easier. So to the extent that there could be a partnership that is already developed, and I think that in terms of the policy piece, I think that's already been developed, right? I mean, that information is all there, but I would just worry a little bit that 2, 3, 4 months go by and they haven't been able to access what it amounts to not be that large of an amount, that would just kind of work against our goal. So that would just be my observation to my colleagues going forward.
And that was a benefit of the Abortion Access Program, was a good chance to pilot and develop a template where we can very quickly drop in a new policy goal, a new funding amount, and very quickly launch that through a competitive grants process. So a lot of the wheel has already been invented and put in place, and we can very quickly launch a new grants program. And as I've told folks, if all the policy decisions are set and all the policy details are set, I can launch a program in an afternoon.
Wonderful.
So,
That's good to hear. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Yes, Mr. Advance.
May I ask a clarifying question? After the application, obviously, I just wanted to get a little bit more in the grain of what HHS's responsibility would be, if any, beyond the initial application review. Will there be a monitoring and oversight capacity or role, or is that just grant management's office completely?
Our office doesn't have the administration function of grants, so we would help draft the grants agreements, but they would be issued by and administered and monitored by the departments themselves.
Okay.
So they would be the same way a procurement contract would sit with you, the grants would actually sit with you to implement. But the department has the full kind of policy leadership of setting up the program, choosing who wins, and then monitoring the awards as they go out.
Awesome. Can I just put a plug? I might have to have a conversation with our COO and internally, but building in potential if we need additional resources, because the team that oversees this body of work is very drowning, and we have very limited bandwidth. So if we could just put a pin and leave it open to maybe consider what additional resources for us to continue to do that appropriate monitoring effectively over time, because our capacity is very limited.
It's a good point, Mr. Advance, and you're absolutely right. I think we should have a subsequent conversation, Ms. Clemens-Johnsons and Ms. McGuire, just overall on capacity, because I know this has been an overwhelming time, especially these last 2.5 years, and we have to make sure the infrastructure is there to be able to do our work effectively.
Thank you.
I think that's very important.
Yeah.
However, I will note that one of the reasons why this is being introduced as a grants program is because it was to provide some flexibility versus adding and identifying more organizations for more of a contract and formal contract process, Mr. Advance. So that was the idea, was to actually make it more flexible and less burdensome
Absolutely.
to you
Absolutely.
to administer. So I hope that that's the case. I mean, that's why, we did all that work to create the grants office, because it really does a lot of the heavy lifting. And then you already should have all of the policy pieces in place and the monitoring in place and everything. And these are going to be small amounts, and really the delivery, the products that they're going to deliver, it's going to be at a much smaller scale than the $1.5 million, which is going to go to the very large organizations, right? So I just want to make sure, though, that that's not seen as a barrier, because actually the intent of doing it as a grants program was to make sure that you didn't have any additional large contracts to have to monitor and to have to make sure that everything was in place. So I just wanted to add that as part of the background conversation regarding this $200,000 very flexible grants process that should not be that much of a burden to administer.
Thank you.
Great. So I think with that objection, the committee recommends moving forward the $1,793,442. I want to make sure I got that number right. I did? Okay, good. And although Councilmember Rice is not here, he did express his support for this as well, but obviously it's not an official vote. So this will now go before the full council. Thank you all, everybody, truly. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Special Appropriation 2319 to the county government's FY23 operating budget, Department of Health and Human Services, in the amount of $853,699 for the Youth Harm Reduction Initiative. And once again, we have Ms. Treadvance here, as well as Chief Jones is here to answer any questions. As a follow-up, I will turn it over to Ms. Yao to tee this one up for us.
In addition to the appropriation, it is also an amendment to the fiscal year 23 operating budget resolution, Section G, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status. At the Youth Safety and Positive Youth Development presentation in June 28th of this year, the council heard and expressed support for the efforts of county agencies and departments in partnership with community partners to scale up services to vulnerable youth to mitigate potential youth violence and harm. Council members understood at that time that additional appropriations in 23 might be needed to support these efforts. And so this special appropriation is before you. The appropriation is broken down into various contract awards that are listed on page 2 of your packet. They include $180,000 for consulting services for coordinated and integrated strategy for violence prevention and suppression, $160,425 to the 480 Club Sports Ambassadors Program, which provides mentorship and peer engagement targeting high-risk up-county middle school and high school students. $50,000 to the BUILD program for capacity building and community strengthening training. $400,000 to Florence Crittenden Services of Greater Washington, Inc. for services supporting teen girls at 6 targeted middle schools, including Loiterman, Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, Neelsville, Odessa Shannon, and White Oak middle schools. And a total of $63,273 to Identity, Inc. for sports-themed youth and community engagement, youth outreach groups, and mental health treatment and well-being services in Germantown, Montgomery Village, and Gaithersburg. There's additional services that are summarized in your packet related to the Youth Harm Reduction Initiative, and those are at circles 8 to 27 of your packet. And there's also an update on violent crime involving youth. Information provided by Montgomery County Police Department is included at circles 28 to 30, and there's some summary of that information on page 3 of your packet. The updated information supports the need for these services, Chief Jones is here to answer any questions that the committee may have. But in summary, council staff recommends approval of the the special appropriation as proposed by the executive, as there continues to be significant need for these services. And like the earlier appropriation that the committee considered, council staff recommends coming back probably in the spring or at least before fiscal year 24 budget discussions to have a more comprehensive update on youth crime and violence trends and service delivery.
Thanks, Ms. Yeah. I'm just going to make an editorial here just very briefly. So Council Vice President Glass and I have been in the youth development space for much of our professional careers, and we both have friends who continue to be on the front lines working and engaging youth every day, every weekend, every night, all year long, 365 days a year. They give out their personal cell phone numbers. They are doing incredible work, and in a very difficult time and circumstance in the history of our country. That work needs to be recognized and honored, and this is a small way of doing that by recognizing that they need help, and they have been asking for it for quite some time. I'll note, just in addition to, that we've got a systemic issue on our hands. These programs are important, these services are important, but they will make a dent for sure. But there's a broader systemic issue that we need to talk about. There was a conversation that was recently had at Odessa Shannon Middle School that I'm familiar with, involving a number of parents that have come forward that expressing deep concern over the type of physical assaults and bullying that they are seeing within their schools. So we have to work collaboratively with our colleagues and friends in the school system. We are all on the same team. We have to acknowledge that, and in addition to appropriating these funds, we have to create an authentic time and space for us to talk about policy. We are advancing policies to right wrongs of past generations. So important. But in the midst of this transition, we have to make sure that things are not falling through the cracks, and I unfortunately think they are. So we, again, Ms. McGuire, Ms. Clements-Johnson, need to set up a time and space for us to have a more robust conversation on the systemic issues that are leading to the need for these additional funds and appropriations. And we'll have to bring our colleagues and friends once together again in the youth development space. But this is obviously important and timely. Did you want to say anything? So with that, I'll turn it over I'll start with you, Chief Jones, just talk a little bit. There have been some high-profile incidences recently in the news, just fights at football games, challenges that we're having after school and in some cases during school. Just sharing any reflections and thoughts that you'd like to share briefly. We'd appreciate it.
Yes, well, thank you, Council President Albernaz and Council Vice Chair Glass. Great to see you. I think there's still some disturbing events that continue to arise throughout the county, but one thing I can say that I have been paying very close attention to as we felt that there was really a call to action about youth violence earlier this year, of course, and we were before these committees, and there was a great deal of work being done in support about that. But I would like to report, at least from the perspective of what we've been seeing, we have seen a reduction in clearly of homicides that occurred throughout the county that did not involve any youth. That from the middle of the summer until and I'll speak to almost recently. And when I say almost recently, because we all work in some cases, unfortunately, that just occurred this week. That is causing some concern. I can speak to that later, but the point being is that we made it through really the middle, the gist of the summer, into the early fall, where there was no major incidents of crime that, from that perspective, that we had youth suspects or victims involved in any major event such as a homicide. From that perspective, there are still concerns that we know that involve incidents of crime such as carjackings, that we're still seeing youth involved in these, and there's still an underlying question mark about why they are involved in these. What is the motivation behind these individuals being involved in such violent acts, in the thefts of cars, and really harming people, even if they're simply just pointing a gun at them. That's fearful enough for our community that unfortunately has been victimized way too many times. And then, there's also information in regards to gun crimes that we're still seeing. And again, in many of those cases that we have, we're finding that the individuals who are caught with guns are a relatively young age. Generally, when I say young, I'm talking about 21 years and younger. And of course, we're still seeing way too many ghost guns in our community. We've doubled the number of ghost guns that we've recovered this year, and we're above that. We're way above the what we recovered. We recovered over 1,000 handguns in our community throughout this entire year, and that's all guns that have been illegally possessed. So that's a troubling sign. And when we know that we have individuals in our community, to include our youth, that can gain access to those weapons, however they're gaining access, that again creates an environment that we have to be concerned about. And so, we still are having, unfortunately, way too many shootings that are occurring. Some that are contact shootings, and some that we just have, shots fired. We're responding and we're finding the evidence that shots were fired in our community. So these are things that I think we have to continuously monitor and be able to report back and work with our partners in county government and our community partners to really figure out strategies to address those very things. But as you noted, in regards to some of the troubling incidents that we've had, particularly the incidents that we've had at the schools regarding football games, the one particularly that was at Gaithersburg High School, again, it was one thing for the event to have occurred that was on the field, but I think what troubled many people in the community is what happened in the parking lot and outside of the stadium, and I think that's where it went. And there were too many young people that were involved in that, who took a different approach to, I don't know, what they felt as a way to resolve a dispute. But clearly, I think it's the wrong direction, and I think it goes to the conversations we've had with Dr. McKnight and her staff, really about having to have these courageous conversations with our youth about how to resolve conflict, and that it does not have to be a physical confrontation. It does not have to be a confrontation that's settled with a weapon, but that it can very well be there's other avenues that we all know that can to come to peaceful solutions or resolutions about some of these incidents. And I think that's a focus that I would suggest, based upon what we've been seeing, that's not only happening at our schools, but that are also happening out in the community, is that it's a driving theme, I think, that should be had by all, that we come together and help young people understand that there is another way to resolve conflict, and I think that's very important from that perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Treadvance, did you want to add anything?
It's just this isn't a simple issue.
Right.
It's been around for a while, and I think the pandemic has just allowed it to bubble up. Again, I will always echo something that Councilmember Navarro told me during my confirmation, that she said, you'll find out very quickly Montgomery County has a lot of assets. It's just figuring out that coordination. I think the answer is here. It's with us. It's in the county. We know it. It's just pulling all of that expertise from all of the parties that are available and all of the right experts, so that we could come together and put a plan together with that knowledge. And in the appropriation, there was a request in there to also have a consultant to come in and really help execute convene, bring everybody together so that we can have a strategy where every single one of our assets are represented and are accountable to address this issue over the long term. Because I know we need immediate responses because the issue is at our door right now, but I think it's also very important to elevate and also center and create space for long-term planning and strategy so that we're not always operating in that space. And I think that's the silver lining of what this opportunity is offering. So thank you.
That was really well said. And just one last note. I know that parent engagement is another new and emerging area that we really need to start focusing on. It's not covered in this specific block of funding, but one more follow-up that I'd love to have in the next council is more robust strategies on making sure we have more supports for parents who we know are struggling. So I think without objection then, let's just make sure I have the right amount. I think without objection the committee supports the appropriation of $853,699 for the Youth Harm Reduction Initiative. Thank you all very, very much. That moves us on to the third item on the agenda, and please make sure, Ms. McGuire, I got this right. The third item is the special appropriation 2329 to the Montgomery County Government's FY23 operating budget, Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, hospital response in the amount of $10 million. Good. And I believe there are several people joining us virtually who are representing our hospitals. And let me begin there once again by thanking our hospitals for their partnership and alliance, not just through Nexus Montgomery, but the long-standing partnerships that our hospitals, which often view each other not as competition, but complementary of each other's services. And the way that they stepped forward during the pandemic was truly extraordinary, pushing the envelope in terms of policies and procedures in a way that we'd never really seen before. And that spirit of collaboration and cooperation has gone a tremendous way, but we know that that has also strapped resources. And we know that they're struggling with recruitment and retention in the areas of nursing and in other key areas that are an ongoing challenge. And so we know that there's more than 10 million needed, but we also know that this 10 million is important right now, particularly to be able to allow our hospitals to get through the other side of the challenges that they've had before them. So I will turn it over to Ms. Clemens Johnson or Ms. McGuire to tee this one up as well, and then invite our colleagues briefly among hospitals to make a few comments. And again, to our colleagues who are on Zoom, we have a hard stop at 2:30 today, so I just ask each of you, if you could, to limit your comments to just a minute or two. That would go a long way. But with that, I'll turn it over to the central staff to mention anything else that they'd like to mention.
Sure. Thank you, Council President. So this appropriation is for $10 million to support the 4 county hospital systems. So in your packet are details describing the challenges that the hospital have cited, which are the reason why they are asking for the funding, which are mainly to support operations and workforce challenges. So the hospitals expressed that in this post-COVID world, if we want to call it post-COVID, that they are still struggling with the workforce issues. Namely, they cited that working with the contracting organization and the rates that went up extremely during COVID. And so just supporting their current staff and staff that were suffering from burnout, staff that were getting COVID, that it was just hard for them to maintain, and trying to get urgent staff to be able to meet the needs of those residents coming into the hospitals. I will share that the distribution of the distribution or proposed allocation of the funds to the individual hospital organizations is within the packet. In April 2020, the County Council approved a similar appropriation for $10 million for the hospitals, and that was at the onset of COVID, really to help them through that emergent and urgent time. And I will cite that, and we'll also cite it within the packet, is that staff went through and kind of saw and tried to understand the COVID-19 related funding support that may have come directly to the hospitals. That has mostly been funded through the state, where the state has gotten ARPA funds and then was able to help support the hospitals, nursing homes, and other health organizations in the state. So there's a detailed listing of that. Of course, it's not comprehensive, but we just wanted to note the funding streams that the hospitals have been able to access during COVID. Not saying that meets their needs, but just stating the factually what has been occurring. And so I will end it there, and just the hospitals hopefully can detail what their needs are. They did note that this was a short-term challenge and that this was a one-time funding request. So it will be on the hospitals if they would like to detail what their plans are moving forward, and to emerge out of this immediate operational issue that they're facing.
Thank you. I'd actually, I see Dr. Stoddard and Ms. Buckland here. Dr. Stoddard, if you wanted to make some comments on behalf of the administration regarding this appropriation.
Thank you, Council President and Council Vice President as well. The county executive has been meeting with the hospital CEOs and discussing this issue for a number of months, and he fully supports this proposed supplemental appropriation. I want to make a couple things clear because I think the millions watching at home may not fully understand the way that healthcare is funded in the state of Maryland. There is a Health Services Cost Review Commission, which often sets the pricing that the hospitals can charge for services. And this works great for controlling costs to our residents under blue sky days, but it doesn't necessarily offer the nimbleness in the current structure to address the emergent needs that a pandemic like what we just saw with COVID-19 emerged. And council staff referred to this, but I think you'll see in the packet that the costs associated with agency nurses has really driven deficits that the HSCRC funding model can't effectively and timely enough address. And so this supplemental appropriation will help serve to fill that gap for the hospitals, recognizing that the emergency funding that they've received has been insufficient to address that full need. The county executive fully believes that the hospitals are an integral part of our healthcare system. Our residents rely on their service. We do not want to see reductions in services that the hospitals might have to implement to cover for their losses during the past year and a half. And so we believe that this supplemental appropriation isn't just a nice to do for our hospitals, but it's really a mechanism to help us protect and preserve the services that they provide that our residents rely on. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. I'm going to go based on the list that I have before me here. So, Mr. Cochran, why don't we start with you to say a couple of words on behalf of Adventist?
Thank you, Council President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and appreciate the fact that you're entertaining this idea. You know, Adventist Healthcare, we are primarily in Montgomery County, Maryland, so almost all of what we do is centered around the local communities that we serve here. And as we look at this funding request, it's really to make up for a difference in the payment that we've seen really with our costs and the way they have escalated over the last couple of years. Early on in the pandemic, there was other funding, as was noted, that was available to cover some of these costs. Those funding sources are no longer available. Unfortunately, those costs have not gone away yet. So we continue to deal with, as was mentioned, the extremely high utilization of contract nursing, which is the number one cost driving, but in every aspect, our costs have gone up. And it was also noted about the HSCRC, and I think this is an important item to note, that the dollars we're asking for are for the shortfalls that we see in our operations today. There will not be a change to the rates that would impact the losses that we are currently incurring. If there's a change to rates, it would be in the future to cover future costs, but it won't help with what we're dealing with today. So this is a one time for what we're dealing with now with our cost increases. To give you some idea of that, as you all know, inflation was an 8% increase this past year. What was given as the rate overall for the state was a 4% increase to hospitals. But when that gets factored into with all other adjustments they do, for our hospital, that ended up in Shady Grove Medical Center, that ended up being a 2% increase. So with a cost increase of 8% and only a 2% increase in our revenue, we didn't have a 6% margin before. So that obviously leaves us in a position that is very tenable from a financial perspective. So these funds would go a long way to help us deal with that in the short term. We do have a number of longer term initiatives underway to address the workforce issues, but they take time to implement and to recoup the rewards from. So wanted to give those clarifications, and I'll yield to the next hospital official.
Thank you so much. Dr. Coots, I see you next up on my list here.
Great, thank you very much. And thank everyone for listening to us today. So very similar to what Mr. Cochran said, I will just tell you that I'm spending in excess of $1.5 million a month over budget for these labor costs. And in looking at what the HSCRC had given us, you have it in your books that at one point in time, $100 million was allocated to the hospitals for COVID. That was actually a loan, and the HSCRC has carved that money back out of our budgets. In fact, Holy Cross lost $13 million this year in the clawback of those funds being taken back to the HSCRC. And we are 2 hospitals in Montgomery County. We are known as the place where babies are born. We're number 1 in the state of Maryland, number 10 in the United States with more than 11,000 deliveries a year. We are at 60% occupancy of nurses, but 100% occupancy of patients because the babies are still coming. And so you can understand that delta is being filled by these travel nurses or these agency nurses because there simply aren't enough other nurses around. So with that, I think that's all I'd like to say, but we certainly appreciate this $10 million infusion into the 6 hospitals here in Montgomery County. It will definitely help. Every little bit helps. And we will continue to do the care that we're giving and a significant amount of uncompensated care that we provide as well to those most in need in the county.
Thank you, Dr. Coots. I got a note. I was one of those babies in 1976 at Holy Cross. Next, I see Jessica Melton from Suburban Hospital.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Councilman, for the time today. I would like to build upon what my colleagues, Dr. Coots and Mr. Cochran, have shared, the economic situation here at Suburban Hospital, the increasing cost pressures of our labor, our supplies, and our support for the community have far exceeded the support that we're able to receive right now through our current rates. What I'd like to add, and I know is consistent with my colleagues, is that each of us takes very seriously our duty to provide care here in Montgomery County. As Dr. Coots has aligned in their essential services for our community, Suburban Hospital also plays an essential role in taking care of our local community. We are the only trauma center here within Montgomery County. We have seen increasing volumes in our trauma center. In fact, in our emergency department, we continue to see increasing volumes far exceeding what we saw last year, with a day last week where we had over 180 patients. Last year, we were seeing close to 117 for a perspective. Those expenses we take serious and have really looked at ways that we can cut back on things that we can avoid, where we can cut administrative costs, so that we can put the resources and finances at the bedside. Because of these increasing volumes, these increasing labor costs, what we're able to do is challenged, and we want to make sure we're able to take care of the citizens of our community. In fact, we have opened an incremental unit here because of the surging volumes and the challenges to discharge patients. That is not covered in our rates at all. We want to be able to continue to do that, but we are at a point where we do need help, and we are asking for help today. And as shared by my colleagues, what we're asking for today helps, but is not nearly enough. We will continue to do the hard work within our organizations to be as efficient and responsible as possible with the resources trusted with us to care for our citizens. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Ms. Weber representing I'm sorry. So Ms. Melton, I think you covered Suburban's interests there. So that represents, I believe, the hospitals represented today. So thank you all very much for that testimony. And I think without objection, the committee recommends the appropriation of $10 million to full council. Which takes us to the final item on today's agenda, which is a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY23 operating budget, Department of Health and Human Services, in the amount of $3,551,720 for American Rescue Plan Act, Older Americans Act Title Grant, and amendment to the county government's FY23 Resolution 191285, Section G, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status, Jewish Council for the Aging of Greater Washington Incorporated, Access Hears Incorporated, Arts for the Aging Incorporated, Home Care Partners Incorporated, Housing Initiative Partnership Incorporated, and the Senior Connection of Montgomery County Incorporated. I'll just highlight very quickly, Councilmember Rice isn't here, but Access Hears is one of the grantees, and I want to thank the executive branch for acting quickly upon a conversation that we had in this committee not that long ago regarding the need for expansion in that very important space. I know Councilmember Rice was very heartened to see this, and he was very happy to see it here. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Clemens Johnson to talk about this appropriation.
Thank you, Council President. So as you noted, this appropriation is a state grant in the amount of $3,551,720,000 that is awarded to the county's area agency on aging. Excuse me. So the grant term is through September 2024. It will support hearing assistant devices, nutrition, dental services for seniors, arts programs for people living in long-term care settings, home and community-based services, and family caregiving services for the pandemic recovery. So this will also support the Section G resolution, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status. So as you mentioned, expanding the award for the Jewish Council for the Aging of Greater Washington by $56,000 for their escorted transportation program. There will be new contracts for the Access Hears program, connecting people with hearing loss to technology and resources they need to age well. Arts for the Aging program that provides arts-related program designed to enrich the lives of older adults in longer-term facilities. Home Cares Partners Incorporated that specializes in providing care, including light chore services to seniors in their homes. And also the Housing Initiative Partnership that creates housing and economic security to support low and moderate income residents. And this grant will focus on, the funding that is provided to HIP will support grants for minor home repairs to seniors to allow them to age in place. And also the Senior Connection of Montgomery County, which is the largest provider of volunteer escorted and accompanied transportation service. We will enter into a new contract with them for $63,000 to foster social engagement with seniors in the county. Yes. So I would just note that the Commission on Aging, as you kind of alluded to earlier, actually had this as part of their FY23 priorities that they put forth in April 2023. So they weren't funded through the FY23 operating budget, but this grant will help support that programming. And I will toss it back to you.
Thank you. Dr. Brunetto, did you want to say anything?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the time and your attention to this grant. We have worked very closely with Secretary Rona Kramer at the Maryland Department of Aging, and she and her staff has approved this grant, approved the contractors that have been selected. As you know, we are very fortunate to work with wonderful community non-profit agencies in the county who are extremely responsive and very, very interested in engaging into these new initiatives. Some of the initiatives are brand new, like the hearing aids initiative, and some are increasing current services. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. I think without objection, the committee supports the grant-funded appropriated $3,551,720. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that's it. All right. With that, our HHS committee session today is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.